if you look into the trans drug cult deeply, what you realize is kind of underlying a lot of these problems, not only in Washington State, but in about 20, 25 states across the country where it's still legal to do this. Planned Parenthood is a major player in the whole thing. They basically put out a lot of the curriculum for the classrooms that teachers use, and they kind of provide some like degree of authority that like parents would believe. And so literally the parents go in there and the counselors are told to tell the parents, well, you're either going to have a dead daughter or a live trans son or something like this. And none of which is true. Now, they've been doing kind of a bad job for a number of years, but they entered the kind of the trans drug cult about 8 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And when they did that, they moved from an area that was legal, what they were doing, to an area that was illegal. This idea of giving kids medical advice and parents medical advice, which is not supported by any science, has never been supported by any science. And that, but yet parents believe it and kids believe it. And so you wind up with thousands of kids here in Washington State who think that they are transgender, which is actually a concept that doesn't exist really. That and they talk about unisex when that concept doesn't exist either. And they talk about how counseling is bad for kids and you got to get kids started on drugs and all this. When there's no science, in fact, there's a mountain of science that shows that these trans drugs are toxic, both the cross-sex hormones and the puberty blockers. And so this whole thing, they talk about how it decreases the risk of suicide when I provided in our complaint about 8 or 10 studies showing that it actually increases the risk of suicide. Any legitimate study has shown that it increases the risk of suicide, including even some of the studies that, for example, Bob Ferguson has used in his legal briefs, claiming that it reduces the risk of suicide. If you read the actual data, even their own studies show it increases the risk of suicide. So we've got a situation where they've been lying to kids and parents, and that's called medical malpractice and medical fraud and stuff. And the Federal Trade Commission has been trying to clamp down on medical fraud for a number of years, largely due with like these health claims where people are told, oh, this thing will solve whatever problem you have. When it turns out a lot of these things are just snake oil. So this is but worse than snake oil. Snake oil at least doesn't do anything bad. Here we're talking about permanently sterilizing children, increasing their risk of cancer by hundreds of times, shortening their life by 10, 20, 30 years, and not dealing with the underlying mental health problems.